Hello, this is Dr. Beverly Wright, and thank you for listening to Tag Data Talk, sponsored by Birchworks and hosted by Dr. Beverly Wright. Birchworks is the national leader in total talent solutions with a specialization in data positions including data and cloud engineering, business intelligence, data science, machine learning, AI, among other roles and career paths. As industry pioneers, Birchworks prides themselves on their approach as trusted advisors and career advocates by providing subject matter expertise, compelling career opportunities, and leading information and research on trends in the industry. Birchworks also leverages their proprietary first-party data and career coaching expertise to offer a range of resources that directly address the gender pay gap. These resources are specifically curated to allow for increased salary transparency, including salary and market trend data, career development advice, and the annual Birchworks salary reports that contain extensive compensation data, hiring, and market research. Birchworks, building a world that works better for everyone.
Hello, I'm Dr. Beverly Wright, and welcome to Tag Data Talk. With us today, we have Dr. Serena Huang, and we're talking about overcoming common challenges as a data analytics leader. Thanks for joining us, Serena.
Thank you so much for having me.
So let's start off with a little background. Tell us, why are you so cool?
I won't call myself cool, but I do have a lot of talent that people don't normally know. In addition to data analytics, I'm also a content creator on LinkedIn and a few other platforms. So it's something that I have really enjoyed doing. I love sharing my knowledge, and I found a platform that apparently loves me back.
Yeah, I follow you on LinkedIn, and you're always sharing something cool. So I would call you cool.
Thank you.
Well, we're talking today about overcoming some of the common challenges as a data analytics leader. And so let's first start off with what are some of the common challenges? Like, there are definitely some struggles. We're still a relatively immature and young discipline. You know, we're not like math or psychology that's been around forever. So we're dealing with our struggles. What would you say are some of the most common challenges that you see in our field?
I would say the first one is definitely the last mile challenge, which is when you have done amazing analytics up front and the stakeholder doesn't do anything with the amazing data analytics that you have done. So that's called the last mile challenge. And second, I would say there's a lot of challenges related to talent today, from attracting talent to retaining talent to keeping them engaged in the remote and hybrid environment. And how do we keep them happy, engaged, and with the proper career path where you have internal mobility that keeps people excited? Those are key ones that I see regardless of the economic conditions. And certainly as we head into 23, when it's a bit more challenging, the talent issues may become more severe.
Gotcha. Well, this last mile, so you talked about two big ones, last mile and talent. Very interesting. This last mile, you're describing that the data science team produces some sort of product, and a data science product or an analytic of some sort. And here it is, these great insights or a technology solution or some kind of platform, and it doesn't get used. Why? How? What is going on?
Indeed. A lot of times, as a data analytics leader, that is one of the most frustrating things I experience with my team. Imagine you have a team of talented data analysts, data engineers that put together, let's say, a beautiful dashboard connected to live data. And then you follow up by a executive presentation in PowerPoint. And then the executive stakeholder goes, that's kind of interesting, and never does anything with it. I bet if you think back as a data analytics professional, that has happened to someone you know or yourself at some point in your career. And in my observation, a lot of times what happens is what I call the first mile problem, is that you didn't get the first mile right, meaning you are solving potentially a problem that your stakeholder doesn't care that much about. So the lack of commitment up front is a huge problem. And I have many stories from my personal experience early on as a more junior analyst, where I would get so excited about a problem or a solution, rather, perhaps a model that is innovative. And
Yeah.
I would bring a solution to the executive team, and they would say, well, that's great, but I don't actually need to solve that problem.
Oh, wow. So, we just kind
indeed.
of, as data scientists, we sort of get excited about the
Yes.
modeling process and about making these discoveries.
That's
and
right.
man, I used to love building really solid models and that have great diagnostics. And I would get
Yeah.
so excited. I remember I worked for Phil Dario at CFI Group, and I built this killer model.
Uh-huh.
And he got it, because he was a senior leader that understood the technical side. And I used to love bringing things to him and be like, look what I built. And so
Uh-huh.
you're saying that sometimes we
Exactly.
get carried away with wanting to build a really solid model and we get our eye off of the actual business question.
Exactly.
Also, you mentioned a kind of lack of commitment and sort of, casual, like, oh, well, that's interesting or that's nice to know, right? We hear that all the time. So how does that happen? How do we end up with stakeholders that spend a lot of time and energy and money on the data science solutions, and they end up saying, well, that was nice to know? Like, how does that happen?
There are a few ways that could happen. A common one I have seen is that the lack of business impact that's identified upfront. And what does business impact mean? I'll keep it very simple. If your data analytics project doesn't have either a top line or bottom line impact, it's probably not worth doing. So is this dashboard or data science, ML model going to improve revenue? Are you going to increase market share? Are you going to reduce customer churn? Are you going to improve the profit margins? What is it? Find one, at least, financial metric that your project will actually improve for the company, and stick with that and actually measure it, because the people who fund your projects will come back to you and ask you what your impact is. And if you come up with, oh, it was very accurate and doesn't actually touch any of the metrics, they're not going to act on it.
Right.
And that's where I see a lot of disconnect of solving a problem that perhaps isn't that severe or needed to be solved, or something that doesn't hit a metric that the company cares about.
So if you picture this as like a bullseye, we're hitting the wrong bullseye right in the middle.
That's right.
And they would rather us
Yes.
just broadly, they be in the business, I guess, they would rather us broadly hit the right bullseye.
Indeed.
Yeah. Okay. So this first mile problem, the last mile problem is related to the first mile.
By getting the first mile right.
Yeah. And it sounds like, too, that not only are we solving the wrong problems, it doesn't seem like we're having the right conversations about what kind of impact or what they're how they're gonna actually implement the solution. That may explain part of why they say, it seems neat, it's interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's definitely a big deal. We got to get
Very
that
big
right.
deal. Very big deal.
The second thing you mentioned was talent. So unpack that for us a little bit. What are some of the common challenges that we're seeing with talent? Do you mean lack thereof? Do you mean the type of talent? What kind
All of it. All of it. Gosh, in this environment, even as the market starts to cool down a little bit, what I have heard and seen is that the market for data analytics professionals is still really hot. And if you have the right skill set from the right industries, you can get any job you want. As a data analyst, a data scientist, or data engineer, filling the blank with other cool titles. And the reason being, a lot of industries that may perhaps traditionally not have realized the value of data, they now have seen it. That is really important. So there's tons of other companies outside the traditional, data-driven industries like tech that really now want to invest in this field. And so what it takes, what's really difficult is, in my experience recruiting and building teams from the ground up, is not necessarily the technical skills, like how to build models, how to clean data, how to build pipelines and so on, but actually the business knowledge. The translator skill, I would call it, is really difficult to find. Meaning, can you translate a problem that can be solved by data analytics to the stakeholders and actually make them, part of the process as you go so that they give you input and feedback on the model you're building or the dashboard that you're building over time and what will be the most useful to them. Because guess what? You're building the dashboard or the model not for you. It's for the person on the other side of the table.
Okay. Yeah, so they're not maybe walking a mile in their shoes or understanding that perspective as much. So for talent, there's, it sounds like you're saying there are, I guess, two big things related to talent. One is there's a lack of data scientists. There's more data science than there are data scientists.
Right.
And we're kind of falling behind, and this has become such a hot thing. More industries are recognizing the value, and more academic programs are producing data scientists, but it's hard to get good ones.
Indeed. Some companies have explored this concept of citizen data scientists internally, where they essentially build a SWAT team or an army of data science professionals who may be doing it part-time. Because I think what we found over time, sometimes with data scientists specifically, is it's hard to engage them because you may not have super interesting projects 100% of the time.
Right.
You might have 10% very interesting, innovative projects, and then the rest is sort of, BAU, less interesting. It's repetitive. You're monitoring something and you're improving it. So how do we keep people engaged? One of the solutions people have come up with in some companies is train some of the data analytics professionals to do data science, or sometimes even those in the business, because they will have the business knowledge and they just have these additional technical skills now to build a model. And maybe it's 10 to 20% of their time.
Right.
So they engage in learning, and they also then, you don't need to try to find data scientists externally, which is difficult.
Right. Okay. So you're, instead of trying to find the rock star from the beginning, you're sort of raising up someone that knows how to use a tool, and they can do the position at least part-time.
Yeah.
Because it's so difficult to keep them engaged.
Right.
And I've seen that too. I mean, I've been teaching for like 20-something years, and my students will come back and say, I'm not doing the cool stuff you taught me.
That's right. I'm bored.
I'm bored. Yeah. I actually had this poor person. She was one of the leaders in the Master of Science and Analytics program, and she actually went to HR and complained that she was bored and not doing what she thought she signed up to do, because unfortunately sometimes the position will say data scientist, and they're trying to attract a certain type of profile, but then when they get in there, they're really just doing data wrangling, and so that makes it tricky.
I have seen a ton of data scientists who ended up doing more data engineering work.
Yes.
Or worse yet, data visualization work.
Oh, yes.
And they're not even trained to do that.
Right.
I've met data scientists who only know Python and had to learn Tableau or Power BI overnight because that's what the business needed at that time.
Right.
And that's not great use of their talent. And granted, it's not as difficult to learn of a skill and it's very useful. It's not a data scientist job.
Right, exactly. So the one of the bigger challenges, aside from the first mile, last mile, is the talent. And the talent, we're looking at something like a lack of data scientists. Secondly is keeping them engaged. And then the third thing you mentioned, this is really interesting how often I hear this. It's remarkable. Especially, I work for Birchworks, and we do talent, we help with talent. So, but the third thing you mentioned is it's not the technical side, which cracks me up. It's not about, people don't usually complain about my data scientist doesn't know how to model.
Right.
They got that backwards and forwards. They know how to model. They're really good, solid technical resources. But the two things you mentioned were the translator skills and understanding the business. So we're going to talk about solutions in a hot second, but the being able to translate and understand different perspectives and understanding that business side are a couple of things that are making this challenging. Before we talk about solutions, is there anything else in particular that you think fall into the really big buckets of common challenges right now?
For talent?
No,
in
for
general?
In general, we've got the first mile, last mile.
I would say
and
data storytelling as a skill. It's become a corporate buzzword in the past few years, but very few people can do it well. And I think sometimes people hear the word data storytelling, they immediately think of dashboards and what colors should I use, what font size, what's attractive to people's eyes, and that's one of them. That's one aspect. But a lot of it is about actually designing something that people would want to use. So I talk about the keys to successful data storytelling. The 3 C's are clear versus clear, meaning if you have built a product where the user has to call you and have you explain it to them, it's not clear enough. Right?
Okay.
If you have a dashboard that is not self-explanatory and they don't know where to find definitions, for example, that is not clear enough. If you present a PowerPoint deck where the executive said, I don't really get it, can you walk me through it? And then that takes another hour of their time, it's not clear enough. So clear is the first C.
And that's self-serve clear. It has to be clear
Correct.
enough that it's
Clear on its own. Yes.
on its own,
Yes.
independent
On
of
its
someone
own.
explaining.
Right.
Okay.
And then the second
That's a high
C-
bar.
High bar, I know.
Yeah.
I know. It's almost like, can you, I don't know, sometimes people have this, can you explain it to your grandmother kind of test, but it's a similar high bar for visualization or PowerPoint presentations. And that's the bar I hold my team to. That it's great when someone calls us back for additional work.
Yes.
But when someone calls us back because they didn't understand what we have built, that's less,
I got
less
you.
cool.
Yeah.
So that's the first C, clear.
Okay.
The second C is more difficult, is care. That your audience needs to care. Whatever you're building, whatever you have created, if your audience doesn't care, nothing matters.
Right.
So people always ask me, how do I know what my audience cares about? Well, that's when you have to spend the time up front in building those relationships and getting to know what they care about. That doesn't mean you talk to thousands of people if you're in a large company who might potentially use your product. But that does mean you need to talk to your stakeholders, for example. And if you have personas, for example, for your products, talk to a sample of different personas and make sure you know their perspectives. So you know what they care about up front, and then that will help you build something that they want to use and they want to see.
And that's the they in this scenario being the requester of the analytic, usually the business side.
Indeed.
So
Yep.
as an example, one of the early work I did was for Atlanta Gaslight, now owned by Southern Company. And we were doing some work with industrial customers. So I said, let me understand these numbers a little bit better by going behind the scenes. And let me put on my closed-toed shoes and walk into the plants of our industrial customers. And my boss thought that was kind of crazy. But I felt like it made the numbers become different. They came alive from being able to
Definitely.
walk through the plant of these industrial customers.
Yep.
And I started understanding more about what that really means.
Indeed.
It sounds like that's what you're saying, is to really try to walk them all in their shoes.
Yeah, it helps.
Yeah.
I've done that during my GE aviation days. Visited a bunch of plants, and it was interesting to see. And it definitely made the problem of solving become alive and more real.
Yeah.
So,
Nice.
I definitely recommend that whenever you can get to know the business better by either visiting different locations, actually seeing how the products are made, it helps.
Yeah.
You got to know how your business makes money at
Right.
the end of the day. Very
Okay.
important. Yeah.
Okay, so it's got to be clear,
clear,
on its own.
yeah.
You got to know that your audience cares about the
Yes.
solution.
And the last C is there needs to be a call to action.
Oh,
Whether that's a dashboard or a PowerPoint, a lot of times I would see junior analysts do a presentation that focuses on how much work they have put into cleaning the data, creating the model, and the innovation that went into the process. And then we found interesting things. The end. And you will see the executives in the room wondering, what am I supposed to do with this?
right.
So there needs to be a call to action. And I would recommend that you don't leave that to chance and you just say it.
Yeah.
You just say it up front and make that actually the beginning of your presentation and don't make people wait until the very end and hear what that is.
Interesting. Okay. Is that the model that you give to your team, is to tell them the answers up front?
Definitely.
And then you can describe
Yes,
like
work
building
backwards.
the data and all that kind of stuff and working backwards.
Definitely.
Wow.
Definitely.
Interesting.
Yes.
I'd
Don't
love
make
to see.
people wait. Don't make people wait.
Yeah,
if you
I
have
would
a
love to see
punchline.
how they react to that, because it's so common for us to
Yes.
walk through the whole, like, we were given this business problem and here's how I restated
Right.
it and here's the data that we
Yeah.
pulled and here's how we've managed it. And all
Right.
that. Yeah.
And if you ask yourself, will my audience care?
Mm-hmm.
You would know that they will care about those things much less than the call to action. So why would you make them wait?
Right, right. Good point. Good point. Okay, so it sounds like the three big challenges, according to Dr. Serena Huang, are number one, that last mile, first mile framing business problems challenge that I think is huge. I keep saying I'm going to write a book on this.
Yeah. Hey,
but
maybe we
I
can
need to.
collaborate.
There you go. Exactly. Number two is the talent, the lack of talent, keeping them engaged. Sometimes they don't know how to translate or understand the business. And then the three biggest challenge that we're dealing with right now is the data storytelling. Bill Franks, a great colleague of mine, just wrote a book about like owning the room.
Yes.
And you have a 3C framework, which I really love, that your content needs to be clear. It's got to, your audience should care about it, and there needs to be a call to action. Like there should be some kind of results, not spend 95% of our conversation about what cool thing we did.
Right.
So let's talk a little bit about solving some of these, because these are, I think, most data scientists I know would say, "Oh yeah, man, me too." But what do we do about this? Are these fundamental technical things? Are they skills-based things? Are they training things? Are they different mindsets? How would you characterize our solutions to solving some of this?
I would say mindset is likely the most important of what you just mentioned. Because if you think about even does my audience care? A lot of times we build products and we create solutions from our perspective instead of from your users or your audience or your executive team's perspective. Of course, we know our perspective better, and that's where we start. However, you don't build a dashboard for yourself. You don't build a model for yourself. You're not the user and ultimate consumer of it. So it's a mindset change. And even the start with call to action on a presentation, that's a big mindset shift where I want to show how much work I went into it. I remember there's a conversation one time I heard the executive team basically told the data scientists that, I know you're very smart. I know you spend a ton of time on this. Can we move on?
Wow.
So
they just say it right up front.
You
Like,
don't want to hear that.
Don't want to know.
Right. That's when the 95% of the work has gone too far in the conversation.
Yeah.
And so I do think mindset is really important. The other, as far as skills and just upskilling in general, I encourage my team to be very focused on learning. And learning is one of the values for me as a person, so I might be slightly biased. But for example, we create at the beginning of a year learning goals for every single person on the team. And I encourage them to have a mix of technical and business skills.
Oh.
So I said you can pick either 2 technical, 1 business, or vice versa. But it's got to be a mix. So a lot of times people would pick things like, communication to key stakeholders as a business skill, or even product management or project management as opposed to coding and modeling. And that comes together really nicely. And then we check in on a regular basis on what's something new they have learned. It's a question I regularly ask people, actually. And if they said nothing, that's either a sign I need to create more time and space for them to learn, or that they perhaps need to be assigned to different projects. And so it's really important for data analytics professionals these days, because the domain is changing so fast, to continue to invest time in learning something new.
Okay. So some of this is solvable by culture shifts and new ways of thinking and a different mindset.
Absolutely.
And then other things are like related to upskilling and learning. And I think if I'm hearing you correctly, you're talking about not just kind of the quant side or the hard skills, but also the soft skills.
Definitely.
And having a training program in place that improves those two things.
Yeah.
Now, so far, this is about kind of our side of the house. What about the business side? Is some of the responsibility on them as well? Because if the baton's not getting passed, it's not necessarily because we're not handing it to the person. Maybe they're not ready to receive it. Like, are there modifications that you think would help improve some of these common challenges on the business side?
Absolutely. I think data literacy has become a huge challenge in a lot of corporations, and sometimes it's difficult to upskill executives on data literacy. And so I do think that requires a corporate strategy, maybe developed by the learning and development team centrally, wherever they sit, or capability building teams internally for that different audience. Because the data literacy for a CFO and a CIO or a CHRO will be different than data literacy for, let's say, a analyst or a manager. So depending on their day-to-day and what problems they need to solve, that could mean different things. Now, generally, you don't need to train your C-suite to become data scientists, but to the extent that you can, they need to be able to ask critical questions when the data team is presenting something.
Right.
And I think those critical questions don't work naturally if you don't have great data foundations.
Right.
So again, I think, of course, there are lots of vendors out there that can offer that type of training. Or internally, if you have a great data analytics team that are willing to do it, you can build a curriculum in-house as well.
Right.
And I've done a ton of workshops internally for our HR executives and workshops on how to tell story with data, for example, and that builds the literacy across the board. And I would make it really practical because it's more domain focused. So if I have people from the same function, I will walk them through a real problem and have them work together on how would you solve this? What data would you use? What potential hypothesis would you test? And then how would you present the results and make a recommendation? And just walk them through the whole cycle. And again, they probably still engage my team to solve their problems. But then if they have something that they can do on their own, they also feel very empowered. And that's incredible to feel these days. I've had many executives call me and said, I feel so empowered. I was able to do this myself without calling your team.
Oh,
so yeah,
that's always
pretty
nice.
Cool. Yeah.
So on the data science, well, on both sides, really, the changing perspectives and the mindset and having sort of empathy for those equations, the business side and the data science side. And then secondly is the upskills and learning both hard and soft types of skills. And then thirdly is data literacy among executives. And we're not talking about like, let's teach an executive how to read an ANOVA chart. We're talking about, just getting them literate enough that they know how to ask the critical questions, the things that are going to really make a difference for them and have impact.
Exactly.
And through UGA, as an example, I have an affiliation over at University of Georgia. We have a Leveraging the Power of Data program that's specifically for executives, and it's becoming more and more popular as executives are trying to understand, like, how do I manage a data science team?
Right.
Like, this is new to me, especially because their focus has traditionally been on trusting their instincts, and leading the company that way.
Yeah, I'm curious, what's the most popular concept in the program for executives?
Gosh, well, they love two parts. The part they really, really love are the use cases. They love seeing how you can really extract value from data. And then the other part is just the terminology. They hear these terms all the time. They're not sure what they mean.
That's right.
Like, what does it mean for machine learning? What is auto ML? Like, what does all this stuff mean? I think that makes them feel, you use the word empowered. I think it makes them feel more comfortable and empowered with the world. Okay, so this is really great. We have these three big common things, which are the last mile, first mile, talent, the data storytelling. And now we've got some ideas about how do you solution for these, which I'm sure are easier said than done, right? Like changing perspectives and coming up with ways to walk in each other's shoes, upskilling and learning, hard and soft, and then the data literacy among executives. So with all that being said, Dr. Serena, what would you say is your final piece of advice? Like if you could tell people like, hey man, look, I know there's a lot you could do, but let me just tell you this one thing. If you could just do one thing, here's what I recommend you do.
Keep learning, stay curious, and be courageous.
Oh, okay. Love
Yes.
it. Now tell me about curious. Can you teach someone to be curious?
Ooh,
Is that a taught skill or is that something you have to sort of tap into?
I do think some people are naturally more curious than others, but there are always things that we're naturally curious about. That will be different from one person to another. And so you can also help a person think about something they are naturally curious about and apply it to whichever topic, data analytics, for instance, in this case, and have a similar mindset to
Love
be
it.
curious.
Love it. I hear people talk about curiosity as the missing link all the time. And
Yeah.
I was just curious on your perspective on that. No pun intended. So keep learning, stay curious, and be courageous
Yes.
in your data analytics journey. I love it. Thank you so much to Dr. Serena Huang for talking to us about overcoming common challenges as a data analytics leader.
Thank you so much for your time and for listening. Please follow me on LinkedIn. And also, if you have time, check out my course. It's called The Data Science of People Analytics.
Awesome. Thank you.
Hello, this is Dr. Beverly Wright, and thank you for listening to Tag Data Talk, sponsored by Birchworks and hosted by Dr. Beverly Wright. Birchworks is the national leader in total talent solutions with a specialization in data positions including data and cloud engineering, business intelligence, data science, machine learning, AI, among other roles and career paths. As industry pioneers, Birchworks prides themselves on their approach as trusted advisors and career advocates by providing subject matter expertise, compelling career opportunities, and leading information and research on trends in the industry. Birchworks also leverages their proprietary first-party data and career coaching expertise to offer a range of resources that directly address the gender pay gap. These resources are specifically curated to allow for increased salary transparency, including salary and market trend data, career development advice, and the annual Birchworks salary reports that contain extensive compensation data, hiring, and market research. Birchworks, building a world that works better for everyone.